Welcome to AgriFood Conversations, brought to you by iSelect, the Van Trump Report, the Yield Lab Institute, and Family Farms Group. I'm Hannah Hund, an analyst on the iSelect Fund Ventures team, and I'm excited to welcome you all to today's discussion. AgriFood Conversations is all about driving innovation in agriculture. Each month, we highlight a specific theme, including emerging topics such as soil health, plant genetics, vertical farming, and aquaculture, to name a few. This month's theme is Food is Health, and on today's call, we're joined by Eziah Syed, founder and CEO of MEND Nutrition. Across the centuries and across all civilizations, naturally occurring compounds that humans have ingested as sources of nutritive value to address hunger have also been used to treat ailments. The practices evolved over thousands of years as early humans were progressively able to discover the specific identification of good and bad plants, healthy, tasteful, and poisonous plant parts in small animals. But then came our exponential rise to modernity and the increasing reliance on synthetic compounds to address illness and disease. Very quickly, we became heavily medicated as a society, and yet many disease rates continued to rise astronomically. Now that we have the tools, the science, and the technology, it's time to get back to the unfinished work of understanding how natural compounds can serve an important role in the treatment and prevention of both acute and chronic medical conditions. In this, there exists a massive opportunity to unlock wellness and improve health and well-being on a societal scale. Each of you knows companies are more likely to succeed with the right network of customers, talent, investors, and advisors. We've invited you to this call because you're some of the smartest, most talented people in MEND's network. You are potential customers of MEND's products and services. You have built a company similar to MEND's, or you are a sophisticated business person or agricultural professional who understands the market and the challenges and opportunities MEND may face. Before we get started, we have a quick poll question to get a better idea of who we have on the call today. Please take a few seconds to answer. While that's running, a few process comments. We are not soliciting investment. This presentation is to provide information to help MEND Nutrition find customers, mentors, and other strategic relationships that can help grow their business. You are all on mute. You can use the chat window to ask a question at any time. This presentation is being recorded and will be available for replay. So without further delay, I'm pleased to introduce Eziah Syed, founder and CEO of MEND Nutrition.
Thank you, Hannah, for that setup and warm introduction, and thank you to iSelect, Van Trump Report, Yield Lab, and Family Farms for the opportunity. We're super thrilled you guys are helping to shape the conversation in this very important space and supporting companies like ours, which we are, as I hope will come through abundantly in the course of this call, very bullish on and excited about. I believe, as you stated, that we have primarily a professional audience on the phone that are in this segment. We love talking to others and collaborating where it makes sense. For example, I think one of our partners from Fonterra is one of the largest dairy manufacturers in the world, is on the line. We invited them. We're working on some really exciting collaborations with them because they too are long on medical nutrition and the implications for society. For anyone that's not in the US, I will apologize in advance for sort of what I'll call just a US-centric view to the problem that we're trying to solve and our approach to it, but hopefully some of the conversation and some of the observations are relevant to you as well. Just a final comment before I jump in. Let's try to make this a conversation and not a one-way monologue. So there's a couple of ways, as Hannah mentioned, you can interact and we make this a dialogue. One is through the window, so you can just kind of raise your hand through the chat window and ask a question. I would encourage you to do that. And then the other is, of course, you can just email in your question. We're here just as much to learn as we are here to share information about us and help you to advance your thinking in the space. So just a little bit about MEND. We're based in New York City. We're founded in New York City. So we're located in Tribeca and Biolabs at NYU Langone, which is the network of life science facilities. In New York context, it's affiliated with the Langone Hospital. And we are researching and working with leaders in medicine and across military and professional sports to advance our core thesis and what we're looking to do in terms of outcomes and clinical nutrition. What we've set out to do is a difficult mission. It takes time and energy, but we've very carefully and methodically built the brand permission, and now we have the good fortune of working with some of the leaders in the industry to really make an impact in the space. So a little bit just background and context on why and how I started this. Roughly 3 years ago, I've been a pretty avid runner and became quite obsessed with running. And at one point, I got a stress fracture in my left foot from all the wear and tear that I was putting into running. And went to the podiatrist, and I was actually put in a cast, which I was supposed to wear for about 6 to 8 weeks. And my pain was still there. So at roughly the 10-week or 11-week mark, I went back into the podiatrist, and he did the scans and showed that the bone actually hadn't fully healed, and I was still experiencing pain. So the cast, unfortunately, had to remain on, and I began to become increasingly frustrated with the situation, but became very curious on my way home as to whether or not I was nutritionally compromised. I don't know why that immediately popped in my head, but it did. And I went home and I Googled nutrition for healing, and the very first article that came up was from Hospital for Special Surgery, which many will be familiar with. This is creme de la creme, perennial #1 in orthopedics. And it was all about nutrition and healing, how critical nutrients are during the state of trauma, and the role that nutrients play in helping to support the healing of the body. So that was really the first aha. And then I began to talk to experts in the New York ecosystem, including surgeons, RDs, dietitians, to bring up this conversation and ask the question whether or not this was relevant. And almost universally, I found that I was getting nodding heads. Not almost, in fact, universally, I found that I was getting nodding heads for folks agreeing with that general premise that this is critical, it's a gap in medicine, we know it exists, and there isn't yet a convenient solution. So if you were to read the 200 articles, other articles that I come across in this space, which were all talking about the critical role of nutrition and healing, even mainstream outlets like Oprah.com, they were all talking about sort of diet modification and the 15 foods that you need to eat to help your body to recover. And I, knowing what I know about the U.S. population and our terrible eating habits, didn't consider that to be a very practical solution. So that got me pondering some more. Why are these people all agreeing to this, and there isn't a solution in this space? So just a little bit of history, I think, is always instructive. The chart at the bottom is perhaps the most blatant oversimplification of history of medicine you'll ever see. So they're trying to summarize thousands of years of human history and progress in medicine into a few minutes is not a wise thing to do. However, I think we can learn from some things in terms of where we've been, some of the ideas that have persisted, some of the things that have stayed with us over time, and what we have perhaps obscured and forgotten in our race to modernity. From ancient times through primitive, through ancient Egypt, to ancient Chinese, to Ayurvedic, humanity tended to have been influenced by the spirit causes of illness. So illness occurred not because of physical causes, because of divine displeasure. So God was upset at us. Demons and spirits had invaded us because of bad deeds or because we weren't sufficiently worshiping. So treatment was really focused on addressing these spirit causes. We had no idea, quite frankly, what we were doing. It was a period full of ghastly trial and error and astonishingly bad ideas like bloodletting, trepanation, which is actually drilling holes into the head to let demons out. But there were also some very good ideas that emerged, like utilizing plants and herbs and recording their effects on health. Roughly around 1200 BC, modern medicine began by the Greeks, Romans, and Arabs, really the Greeks first, and a shift away from this mystical, spirit-oriented view of what illness was to a much more natural view of what medicine or what illness was through a study of anatomy and biochemistry. We began to look at the whole body and systems. Much of medicine was really focused on balance between humors. And in this period, there were still, plenty of bad ideas, but they also discovered some good ideas, like having people trained in anatomy and biochemistry by real doctors and not priests. Ideas like stressing diet, lifestyle, exercise, and cleanliness. That was really critical in those times when we had things like the plague and mass infections. So fast forward to today, medicine is really primarily allopathic now. What that means is trying to address disease and illness through interventions like medicine and surgery. It's not there's been a shift in emphasis away from sort of the prevention and into more treatment-oriented approach. And we now have deep domain expertise in highly specialized areas. So there's a specialist for everything. There's a specialist for your elbow, there's a specialist for your finger, so on and so forth. And we're at the doorstep really of some really exciting exponential advances that will be enabled by technology and data. So we have an awareness today because we're aware of the history and where we've come from on the need for a more integrative approach, a more holistic approach. But modalities like clinical nutrition remain relatively absent, just like I discussed in my personal case. So we'll just take a look at a couple of examples, and then I'll get into a couple of use cases on how MEND is addressing this problem. So in orthopedics and more broadly in the general surgical population, up to 50%, and the numbers kind of all over the place. I've seen numbers as high as 60%. I've seen numbers lower, on the lower end of sort of 30%. But patients are going into the surgical environment undernourished or malnourished, from the perspective of where we think they need to be sound for surgery. So the body, when you enter a trauma like a surgery or an injury, and it's in a higher metabolic state, it requires more energy and resources to repair the tissue and you deal with things like infections. So from that standpoint, patients are going into a surgical environment. A lot of patients are going in malnourished. Malnourished patients have a much greater risk of complications. And again, depending on the nature of the surgery, complications, not only is it extremely onerous, difficult, arduous for the patient, it significantly raises costs in the surgical environment. So in the orthopedic environment, in joint replacement, which we'll get to in a case study, patients that need revision costs somewhere on the order of $10,000 more to treat. A study done by University of Michigan looked across populations, and they found in their environment, revisions and complications cost closer to $30,000. The U.S. military has done studies on this, and they found a range of $10,000 to $15,000. So it's expensive. And yet 3 out of 4 surgeons and now are starting to believe in the value of perioperative nutrition to reduce complications. But from a hospital context, only 1 in 5 patients actually receives a perioperative intervention. So, sort of why this discrepancy, why when we recognize that there is, this problem and there's a gap, why does this still exist? Ultimately, we think it comes down to a few factors. One is the hyper specialization that we've spoken about. So doctors simply aren't trained. They're getting more and more specialized into their domains, and they're not trained in these other modalities. That's sort of, then there's just the science piece. Have the companies like ours and yours really done the hard work of developing the studies to demonstrate the efficacy and the safety? So we've developed a scientific method. We know that modern science really runs through placebo-controlled, double-blind, randomized trials for a whole host of good reasons, and that's something that we shouldn't move away from. But MDs are trained in this method. Anything that doesn't meet this high standard simply just doesn't get credence from them. And finally, there's the business model piece, right? So it's crude. It sounds crude, but there's unfortunately no escaping it. The bottom line drives a lot of decision making in the hospital realm and the medical realm there's no difference. So there is from our perspective and yours as well, if you're trying to cater to the healthcare domain, a fairly seismic shift that is coming. For those who aren't familiar, there's a new system being implemented called value-based care. And what it is a risk-sharing model that puts the greater onus on providers to achieve good outcomes. So payers will give a lump sum to providers for a specific condition, and it's the provider's responsibility to achieve good outcomes with that payment. So in previous model, if the patient was ill and had to continue returning to the doctor for treatment, that resulted in a payment. What the insurance companies have effectively said is, no, we want you to share in that risk. We'll give you money for this, but here's a lump sum. And if the patient has to continue returning to you, then the onus is on you to make sure that they're better. And this new model, providers are going to be motivated to maximize their dollars. And since complication rates are so costly and so impact the bottom line, they will look very seriously at any intervention that can help you reduce these complications. So in summary, if we can develop good science and we can prove out the mechanisms, we know that the business model is there and it's coming. So we can improve, we can make a big impact if we can demonstrate through really good science and make this a part of mainstream medicine, and make really money for the hospitals as well. So the question then is, how big should the aperture be? How big is this opportunity? When you look at the FDA definition, which quite frankly, we have some challenges with, we're not in love with it. The definition was developed roughly 2 decades ago and hasn't really changed that much and taken into consideration, the latest science and the latest research. So how they define it is a food which was specifically formulated to administered either oral or anteriorly under the supervision of a physician, which is intended for the specific dietary management of disease and condition. In this case, where just a natural modification to one's nutrition protocol can achieve the end state. So you're clinically deficient in a particular nutrient or set of nutrients. We believe that we need to widen the aperture quite significantly, and that healthcare can be impacted by nutrition across a continuum of healing through chronic conditions and into healthy healing. So I'm going to move into sort of how we think about the space and how we've segmented it. And again, I would encourage questions along the way. So on the bottom axis of this 2x2 that you see is a sizing of the size of the market, and then on the left axis you see the nature of the uses. So is it an episodic use or is it continuous use? And what we've done is we, through looking at the scientific literature and meta-analysis, we've mapped out and published the evidence where we believe there's a role for targeted nutrition strategies. The green and blue is where we are active today, and the others is where we've done an initial science and market scan. Many of you are undoubtedly working in these areas. I think that really the takeaway from this is the opportunity is immense, but we need the science for our solutions to become widely accepted in medicine. So this can become mainstream and we can all have a very large impact on society. So the science, we have a number of trials in motion with leaders. Our model is heavily focused on finding the right domain experts to work with and have them work with our science team to advance clinical trials and solutions that we conceive and develop. The market is starting to take notice of our solutions. So we're having, folks reach out to us, leaders in medicine, that are saying that, we want to work with MEND because you're a pro-research, pro-science company. And so I'll just give you on this slide just a couple of examples of studies that we have in flight. We have a solution that I'm going to speak to in a second that has demonstrated efficacy in a number of clinical trials, and now it's in commercial application. It's in formularies in hospitals and being deployed by hospitals across the nation. We're taking that same solution into a trial, into a different use case with Mayo Clinic. So that study is in flight, and we hope to have results in the next couple of months that'll demonstrate that we can solve a problem with that same formulation. With University of Iowa, they reached out to us. This is one of the sort of the leaders in clinical nutrition space. They're working on a really exciting proposal for the Department of Defense, looking at orthopedic trauma, and orthopedic trauma has many of the same challenges in other orthopedic populations in terms of return of function. They identified MEND's products as having the right set of attributes to help solve for that problem. And we're entering, hopefully, if the DoD proposal gets approved, into the largest of its kind multi-site trial, which will be 12 plus locations with hundreds of patients in both placebo and the MEND population through that study. Lastly, with Des Moines, the former president of the Foot and Ankle Society reached out to us. They're looking at foot and ankle pathologies. And this kind of comes back to my comment earlier that doctors are starting to take notice of this. They were looking internally at nutritional intervention to address foot and ankle pathologies. Came across MEND in one of our formulations and said this has all the elements that we need to address this problem. And so we are, working with them on addressing this clinical trial. I'm going to take you through a couple of case studies to kind of bring this to life. In the joint replacement population, which is growing astronomically, forecasts are by the end of the decade, we're going to have roughly 2 million joint replacements done from roughly 600,000 today. One of the key challenges is muscle atrophy and weakness. And so when the limb is under surgical trauma and because of disuse, what happens quite commonly is your quadricep can atrophy quite significantly. And that atrophy can persist and stay with patients for years. And so when this happens to patients, they're significantly higher risk for complications. They have much longer hospital stays. And as I mentioned earlier, their cost to the hospital system is quite significant. In this case, $10,000 more. So we developed a solution that was actually developed out of university research by PhDs. It's essentially a blend of essential amino acids in very high concentration that is taken perioperatively. So that means pre and post surgery. So you take this solution 1 week pre, ideally 6 weeks post, but it can be taken, the efficacy has been shown as little as 2 weeks post. And what we've shown is a preservation of muscle, a faster return of function to the muscles. When we had patients do up and down tests and things that show functional mobility, they perform better. And then in the latest set of mechanistic studies to look at sort of the underlying causes and what was actually taking place, we found that there's a proliferation of muscle cells prior to surgery. So on the day of surgery, there's more muscle T cells. Post-surgery, there was a reduction in some of the inflammatory markers that build up. It's just basically, in summary, just created a more favorable inflammatory environment versus the placebo. So this is a nutrition solution, and this will get back to my earlier comment about the FDA definition, right? So the FDA is talking about dietary management of a disease where there's a clinical deficiency. Well, first of all, joint replacement isn't a disease, number one. Number two, this product doesn't need to be administered by a doctor. Many of our patients will buy this themselves. And so definitionally, but this is a medical nutrition intervention. This is a solution that's specifically designed using natural compounds to address a medical problem, which we'll go through another use case, and we'll illustrate this kind of again. So another solution that we're really excited about, just about by the numbers, 3 million sports TBIs per year. Add to that TBIs from car accidents and falls, and then TBIs from the military, from blast exposure and head trauma. This is millions and millions of brain traumas a year. Roughly 75% of these TBIs are considered mild to moderate, so primarily mild, which we call concussions. We know that repeated concussions are strongly associated with things like CTE and other neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's. We also know that nutrition plays a very significant role in many of the neurological cellular processes. So we've developed, this is a partnership with Dr. Hausman out of MIT. We've developed a formulation and a solution based on our literature search and really promising studies that have been done on certain compounds. And our hypothesis is that when you take this solution, for example, if you're an athlete and you take this before a football game and you have a concussive impact, that the solution will have neuroprotective properties, so there will be limited CNS damage from having this solution in your system. And then it'll also be neuroreparative, so there'll be regeneration of neurons as a result of having this in your system, and will reduce the overall inflammation in the system. Another acute phase solution, and you can kind of, again, think about the definition and perhaps the widening the aperture as it relates to this. So with this particular product, we are advancing a study with the DoD. They've already indicated to us that they'd like to fund their arm of the study. It's TBI is a huge problem in their population. And then we're looking at athlete populations through a partner called Athlete Hub to bring the athlete world, athletics world into this, because it's also a huge problem there. This is really my last slide, and then we'll open it up to discussion and questions. But we have a very active innovation funnel, and we really continue to emphasize and lead with research. We're working in a number of domains that we've identified. And a big part of our focus is going to be to get those studies continuing to advance and then moving into different form factors. So in some of our solutions, we're in powder today. We're looking to move into ready to drinks and bars and gels. And then we're looking at technology-based solutions also, that we can make our solutions more accessible to the broader audience, but also play that role that I talked about earlier, where we think technology can allow healthcare to take a much more integrated view to how nutrition is incorporated into the well-being of patients. I'll just close with this. we're super excited about the space and all the great work being done by others. As a company, we're very collaborative. As collaborative is a core philosophy of ours. We're very pro partnership. We love learning from others, and if you see an opportunity here where there's an opportunity for collaboration, we'd love to hear that. We'd also love to hear about what problems you're trying to solve, because it expands our thinking where we can go and how we can work with others. And with that, I'll close it to questions and comments from others. I know, Samita, you're on the line for Fonterra. It'd be great to hear about what you guys are thinking about through the new venture that you've set up for medical nutrition. Anyone else that wants to comment? Any questions?
Perfect, and thank you, Eziah. I was talking and I was on mute. Thank you so much for sharing your story to date and for really giving us your perspective. We really appreciate it. Just to let the attendees know, if you want to ask a question, there's the Q&A box at the middle of your screen. And then also, if you'd like to be unmuted, you can raise your hand using the participants feature that pops up on the right side of your screen. Right now I'm seeing that Meg Brigman has her hand raised. Eva, if you could unmute her, I think she has a question to ask.
Hi, can you hear me?
You can.
Awesome. Eziah, thank you so much for this presentation. It was really interesting to learn more about MEND and kind of the work y'all are doing. I have two kind of related questions. One being on the side of how MEND distinguishes itself as medical nutrition versus kind of a nutrition supplement style, and kind of the key points that differentiate you there. And then the other question relates to a lot of these products seem to be on the recovery side. Are you working towards things that are on the preventative side?
Yeah, two really good questions. So let me start with the first, sort of just definitionally. We decided very early on in our journey to make sure that we were positioned as a company in the clinical and medical space, because that's where we want to have an impact. We want to be in hospitals and PT practices and in the orthopedics realm and PT practices, and working with professionals. We see an opportunity to give medical professionals another modality that we think is absolutely critical to well-being. And I'll just give physical therapy as an example, because that's really where we've started. When I first spoke to my brother about my condition and my bone not healing, I said, "Do you in your PT practice use any nutritional interventions today?" He said, "No, it's not part of professional scope, and we're just not trained in it." But recently, the American Physical Therapy Association has actually changed their tone on that. That's the sort of the governing body, and they've actually put out a guidance that says they are putting it in scope, because they view nutrition as being very critical to many of the conditions that physical therapists treat. So now you have to give them a solution, because they don't have the formal training to be able to say, to take a patient through a questionnaire and tell them which product to take. And being medical professionals, they will want to look at the double-blind randomized trial. So you have to have both. You have to have a solution that's convenient. You have to have the science and the studies to show that it's efficacious and make it easy for them to deliver to their patients. So we very intentionally, it is a nutraceutical, I think under any technical definition of the term, but we as a company are not playing in the let's mass market this through vitamin shop. We're working, we're very focused on working with hospitals and professionals to make this very integral and core to medicine. That's just part of our core strategy. So you won't today find MEND in your Walgreens or Duane Reade. You'll find hospitals and surgeons and doctors saying, "I want you to be taking this as part of your recovery." The second part of your question around, right now we're looking at, we're really focused our solutions on the acute space, because that's where we saw the biggest gap, right? So you have a trauma, we know your needs are increased during that trauma. And what can we deliver during that period to increase your well-being and enhance your recovery? But we are very much thinking through the customer's journey through chronic conditions and into well-being. One of the products that we currently have in market was designed entirely around sarcopenia, so the loss of muscle mass as we age. And most people just don't know how important muscle is. They think it's, they look at it purely through an athletic lens or an aesthetic lens. It's, muscle's about looking good. I don't really need to worry about muscle, but it has so many important metabolic functions. And we need to maintain muscle as we get older, but yet we lose it. And so we put the science into the understanding why we lose it and how we can preserve it so we can maintain vitality, mobility, fight off disease as we get older. So that is very much in the wellness part of, daily living part of our business. So we are very active in that, but we're most active in the acute part of our business. But thank you for those questions. Both great questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for the answers. That was really insightful.
And I welcome, I know a number of the MEND team, you guys are on the line as well. This is called Agri-Food Conversation. So let's have a conversation. If there's anything that you would like to jump in with, any additional insights, it's a great platform for sharing and learning.
Yeah, anyone that wants to share, feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute you on the right. And then I think after we've done that, you'll be able to unmute yourself to talk. In the meantime, Eziah, we have another question from Amit Patel. They ask, where do you source the ingredients from, and is there a focus on organic, non-GMO, et cetera?
Yeah, so we are always biased as a core philosophy of our company towards as natural as we can, as organic as we can, non-GMO wherever we can. So when we work with our labs and our sourcers, we always emphasize those attributes. So we quite frankly, we have compromised a little bit on taste in some cases because we've chosen the natural route because we think that's where the market is headed and that's what's most important to consumers. And there's plenty of ways to blend our products to make them, or mix our products to make them taste really great. So from a sourcing perspective, those are the things we emphasize with our labs. We are currently working with third-party labs that we have identified as kind of the best in the industry. So we have 3, we have lots of redundancy in place, but we're quite comfortable with the accreditations that they have. So they're NSF certified, they are FDA approved labs, and they meet the sort of the highest standards in terms of quality. And that was something that we put a lot of emphasis on in terms of finding the right partners to work with on the supply chain side.
Great, thank you. And I think we have a question coming from Chris. Chris has their hand raised. Eva, if we could unmute them.
Hi, can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes.
Great. My name is Chris Cussy. I actually work with MEND. I run our operations. So I just wanted to bring up one point to Meg's initial question, Eziah, that might be helpful for you to give some background on around prevention and chronic disease management. While we are in this current space that Eziah has spoken to around acute and nutraceutical prevention, we're, as a brand, really interested in exploring anywhere that we think nutrition can play a role. And one of those is kind of chronic disease management through whole foods and medically tailored meals. So Eziah, it might be interesting just to give a short background on what you think there for the audience.
Yeah, look, I think there is enormous opportunity in medically tailored fields, and our perspective perhaps is a little different than where the market has gone, which is, let's make sure people are eating the healthiest foods, right? So the way the disease is managed, our chronic conditions are managed today, is make healthier options available to you. Most of what you see out there in terms of solutions, whether it's meals delivered to your house or it's some other intervention, is about let's make healthier options available to you. Our perspective, just like we've done with the acute solutions, is why not look at nutrition as a way to help advance or help address the underlying condition and disease. So are there ways and solutions, are there compounds, are there combinations of compounds, are there foods and meals we can put together that would actually help to make the condition better in a very, very targeted way? So sort of the best example would be if I have some sort of inflammatory condition. Can we give you a very specific set of nutrients that are designed and demonstrated through placebo-controlled trials to help reduce that inflammation? So what we're intending to do on the chronic side of things, not unlike the acute side of things, where we are investing in the science, is develop foods and meals and things that people consume on a daily basis, but that are backed by trials that specifically shows that we're helping to improve their condition, not just kind of manage it and keep it where it is. Thank you for pointing that out, Chris. I think that is an important point.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. We have another question from Christian Namack. They ask, will this typically be covered by insurance, such as Medicare or Medicaid?
Yeah, so Christian, thank you for the question. I think that's where we all have an opportunity as professionals in the industry to really shape policy, and that's why I hammer the FDA definition a little bit every chance I get, because I think they should be. I think we need to make these solutions as accessible to the general population as we can, so we have the greatest impact on well-being as a society. We have just learned anecdotally through a patient that reached out to us that our joint replacement solution was covered, partially covered for her by her insurance company. It's something that, quite frankly, we're not fully educated on, don't have all the right expertise and understanding the elements of getting into insurance. But I can tell you in the Geisinger case, where we are in formulary in the hospital, Geisinger operates its own insurance effectively and have their own model in terms of how they assess the payback on these types of things. They've determined that paying for a patient to have MEND makes good business sense, not just good clinical sense, but makes good business sense. So our hope very much is that as more and more evidence comes out, not only from MEND but others that are working in these domains, that the insurance world will really take notice of this important development and begin to give patients greater access. It's absolutely critical if we want to have widespread adoption and have the largest impact that we can have.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question from John Crawford that seems a little related. He wonders, does your nutrition program offer solutions for post-operative knee repair? He's especially interested in cartilage support and arthritis.
Yeah, so I think was it John? I think you said John.
Yes.
So John, thank you. So the specific problem that we set out to solve with our joint replacement product was the muscle atrophy and weakness that occurs. So that particular product, from a tissue repair perspective, even though there's sort of proliferation of muscle cells and there's a reduction in inflammation, which one would think, and there's reason to believe, I'll say, that it might be helpful, but we can't point to any specific studies that says that it will help in that particular use case. So I can't say to you, yes, this is backed by a randomized trial, and here's the evidence. What I can tell you, though, is with our orthopedic product, the one that I referenced is going to be studied on the orthopedic trauma population as well as others. We will specifically be looking at the two conditions and indications that you just shared. Now, I don't have studies to share with you today. I have anecdotal evidence that it may help in that particular use case, but we are working very aggressively on those studies.
Great, and thank you for sharing that. The next question is from Jim Tam. He wonders, should I expect any weight gain from adding this to my regular diet?
Well, so Jim, thank you for that question. So one thing that we tend to forget during trauma is that's not the time to be worrying about weight gain. There's plenty of other time to be worrying about weight gain. So when you're under a physical stress or trauma, that's when you want to kind of just let the calories go and consume as much as you can of the healthy foods and nutrients. However, our products are not designed to be meal replacements and heavy in calories. So for example, the joint replacement product, Chris, you'll probably know this off the top of your head, but it's less than 100 calories. It has absolutely no sugar. And that's another core philosophy that we seldom put sugar into our products in any meaningful quantities. So in joint replacement, it's so low that we weren't even able to put it on the label itself. So no, the answer is no. You won't pack on any pounds for MEND, but I would say that if you're dealing with surgery or dealing with an injury, and just let yourself worry about weight loss after you've recovered. So don't worry about it during that time, because your body needs all the energy it can get, and that's what it's using as a source of fuel. And that's what it's using as a source of the building blocks of repair tissue. So I wouldn't worry about it at that time. Thank you for the question.
Great, and thank you for that answer. I think if anyone wants to unmute themselves and place any comments, we have a number of people that we've given that ability. But in the meantime, I have another question. What are some of the greatest challenges you've faced with developing a clinical nutrition product?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. So, clearly the most challenging is capital to do the studies. Our studies take a long time. They're expensive. You have to find a willing partner. If you want to be credible, and that's what, the industry is what it is. Unless you get published in the most, sort of acclaimed, respected journals, you're not going to get the attention of the best doctors. So you got to get published in those journals. So you got to, work with reputable partners to make sure that you're doing really good, well-designed studies. And those are not cheap. And so a lot of times when partners reach out to us, we're looking for partners, the cost side of things is really the biggest challenge. So that's number one. Number two is, even when you have the studies, we found that hospitals are extremely slow to move and slow to adopt. So the sales cycle is very long. It takes quite a bit of effort and energy and time. And hospitals, in some cases, MDs that we put studies in front of, even if you have one study, sometimes they're not particularly compelled by one study. They want to see more, and they want to do studies themselves because it was done by somebody else. So even when you build a good science, they want to see more science, and sometimes they want to do it by themselves. It's a difficult channel in that regard. And then obviously it is a highly regulated channel with lots of risk, and so you have to have a fairly thorough review on the safety of your product. So, going through the review that we did at Geisinger in the formulary, we had to put together a 30-page document that answered all the questions on how products manufactured, the nutrients, the safety, the evidence, all those sets of things that go into it, because they're asking patients to ingest something, and that creates enormous liability for hospitals. And so, I would say that that's the second most challenging, and things take time. These things, from a startup's perspective, you have limited capital. You have to do the studies. The studies take time, so it's a real challenge to maintain your momentum and investment while you've got the capital that you have in the bank.
Yeah, absolutely. All of those factors sound really important. John has raised his hand. John, you're actually unmuted, and you can go ahead and speak.
Well, apologize. I had to hop between a couple of different things, and I don't know if you addressed the question. I put it in the chat bar before I figured out the Q&A bar was where it belonged. Anyway, I was just wondering if you've had any experience with your nutraceutical helping in post-operative knee, let's just say, recovery, in particular for helping to support cartilage, repair and helping to reverse arthritis. Any experience at all there?
So John, we don't have any published studies in that realm, but I can tell you right now, the Mayo is studying our solution on arthroscopy population, the knee arthroscopy population. So we'll have some results from that coming out, and hopefully in a couple months. The Arthritis Foundation is one of our study partners. Let me just go back to our study slide. The Arthritis Foundation is in fact one of our study partners that we're also advancing a study with to look at the impact of some of our solutions on arthritic conditions. Again, I don't have any published data to share with you in that realm. What I can tell you though is our MEND orthopedic product, if you look at the nutrition profile of that, the fact that it was selected by both University of Iowa and Des Moines and has displaced some other tissue repair products that are developed by the largest pharma in the industry, that all of the evidence points to that product having a lot of merit for what you've just talked about. But I don't have a randomized trial that I can put in front of you just yet that demonstrates that it does, but we hope to soon.
Assuming there's no negative side effects, why wouldn't it be something that a patient could independently try? Is there any downside
they
to
absolutely
that?
Can. Absolutely. You're 100% correct. And all of our nutrients that we select are what's called generally recognized as safe. So there's nothing in the formulations that has any contraindications or any challenges with respect to health. And there is absolutely no harm in trying. But we are very careful about the claims that we make. positions that we take on the efficacy. So I will never tell somebody that. I think, yes, definitively it'll work if we don't have the randomized trials to support.
Okay. No, I get you. I get you on that. Okay. And I could probably acquire this through a qualified professional.
You can acquire it either through a qualified professional or just directly through us. And what I'll do is I'll have Chris send you, as a part of this family gathering that we have going here, just give you a special code so you can get a good discount so you can try it out.
That'd be awesome. That'd be awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Great. Next, I actually have a kind of a comment and a question from Sumita. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and ask it out loud.
Yes, Sumita, join the conversation. You guys are doing some really interesting stuff. So just
and Sumita, you should have the ability to. Yep, there you go.
Go ahead.
Okay. Excellent presentation. It's been a pleasure working with MEND to try to kind of create solutions with them. They're really innovative in all kinds of solutions they're coming up with. I want to kind of pick your brain a little bit on who is driving that wave towards the value-based care that's really going to transform our healthcare. Currently the options that are available in the acute care are so low end and low cost. That's going to take a big effort to change the decision makers to move towards something that's going to really help the patients. So I wanted to pick your brain and have you speak a little bit about the value-based system and who's driving that.
Yeah, and just to play back for everybody, we are in a multi-payer model, right? So we've got a lot of insurance companies in the U.S. that people sign up for, and their health coverage is paid for, by the insurance companies on an episodic basis. So if I have a need to go see the doctor or a specialist, I go, and then they bill the insurance company pays. So there's a long running dialogue and conversation about the efficiency of that model as it relates to the cost of healthcare, the rising premiums, and how much insurance companies are having to pay the providers overall. So Sumita, as you can imagine, the payers are the ones that have really been advocating for a risk-sharing approach, right? So they're saying in the prior model, you have no particular incentive, really, quite frankly, to make sure that the patient gets better, because the more the patient visits, the more money you make. In this new, and of course that's not true, right? Doctors care very much about their patients' well-being, and my brother takes the well-being of his patients. He's a physical therapist, very, very seriously. But in this new model, what the payers have done is said, let's share in the risk. So if I give you a lump sum of money and you do a really fantastic job, all of that additional margin is yours. We're not taking that back, and then we'll give you some additional money for doing. So there's a grading system. We'll give you some additional money for doing a really great job. But if you don't, and you're doing a lousy job, and your patient comes back for 30 more visits, and your costs run astronomical, responsibility, and that's your risk. So that's the model that we're increasingly moving into. A number of hospitals are in that system today. We expect others to follow, and it's moving downstream into PT and other care providers. And Nina, does that Samita, does that answer your question?
Oh yes, it does. Thank you.
But
I'll just add,
go ahead, Chris.
When Samita, you mentioned acute care. I mean, that acute care is actually one of the places where value-based care is being adopted more heavily, joint replacement specifically. There's a program called Comprehensive Care for Joint Replacement, CJR, which is starting to be very widely adopted because in some of those acute settings, you can better understand the risk of a patient because they aren't these long-term chronic patients, and you can understand the costs and the recoveries and complications. So we're seeing it a lot in joint replacement specifically, and other areas across orthopedics and PT. So just to give you kind of a concrete example.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's good.
Yeah, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to add them to the Q&A or raise your hand. In the meantime, Eziah, I think something I'm really curious about, could you talk a little bit about your strategy behind building relationships with orthopedic surgeons?
Yeah, I think we spoke about that when we were first introduced. What we learned very quickly. So just so everybody on the phone knows, our initial strategy was I recognized the gap in physical therapy as a result of my personal condition and the fact that my brother is a physical therapist and was operating 3 practices in New York. And I said, why aren't PTs using this? This makes no sense. I mean, if there's a solution that works, why wouldn't this work for PTs? So what we learned very quickly was PT's livelihood is really quite dependent on their referring orthopedic surgeon. So they get all their business, or a significant part of their business, other than sort of walk-ins, from orthos that are saying, I want you to go see Dr. Syed. And so for them to do something that's new and novel, that isn't sanctioned or approved by the orthopedic surgeon or isn't standard of care, presents a risk to them because they can't afford to lose that referring orthopedic surgeon. So that was a roadblock for us, and we learned that the hard way when we first set out to do this. And so we knew that to have a chance at having a conversation with orthopedic surgeons, we need to have the studies. So we spent most of our time in these early days just really laying the groundwork for the studies and getting the studies done. And what we found now, which I'm really kind of pleased to share, is we're getting conversations with the leaders in ortho. So with Mayo Clinic, Dr. Chabra is the one running the study. He's their head of sports medicine out in Arizona. With Penn Medicine, we're working directly with Dr. Sheth, who's their chief of orthopedics. At Cleveland Clinic, we're working with Dr. Krebs, who's their chief of orthopedics. And when we talk to others, they're quite amazed that we're getting access at that level. But I can tell you that orthopedic surgeons, like other doctors, get it. They get why nutrition is important, and what's important is to get the studies in front of them so that they can say, okay, we knew there was value in this, and now you're showing that there is value, and you're showing concrete science that proves that out. And so that was the reason, Hannah, is that we knew that it was really important to get to the stakeholder group before we went down into PTs. But now we're spending a significant amount of our time and energy actually going marketing into hospitals because we have the studies, and obviously there's a compelling business model there.
Great, and thank you for sharing that perspective. Well, I have a few kind of final questions on my end. The audience, please feel free to add any more comments or any additional questions that you have after this. But kind of my final questions are, what can the audience help you out with here, and how can they find you?
Yeah, thank you. So our website address is mend.me, MEND.me. I can be reached at Eziah at mend.me, so feel free to just send me an email directly, or Chris at mend.me. Chris was the other one earlier on the phone. Look, we're excited about the space. We don't think MEND has all the good ideas. Most of the good ideas are going to be out there in the world with you all that are in the industry, that are professionals helping to advance the space. Continue to advocate for, continue to educate. When Hannah presented this opportunity to me, I said, of course, because it's an opportunity to talk with others in this space that are thinking about solving problems, and it's going to take a lot of us to address different sides of this to make this mainstream and have the largest impact that we can have. So continue to advocate for, continue to educate, and then we're looking for collaborations. If you have some IP, if you got some research and you think, hey, MEND could potentially be a perfect partner for this as a good market vehicle, as a joint research partner, we'd love to hear from you. So I think it'd be the most immediate things. But to my MEND team, if there's anything else you guys would like to ask of the group, feel free to jump in.
No, I think that's great. I mean, just from kind of a product standpoint too, we're always looking for the best and newest. So looking forward not only from the research and commercialization, but also suppliers or partners when it comes to new and exciting ingredients that have clinical support. So something we're always interested in is we want to bring the best products to our patients. So just one other thing to add. I know there's a lot of ag businesses on the line as well.
Anything else?
Nothing from my end. This is Whitney, also part of the MEND team. I think you've done a good job in terms of covering kind of what we view the market opportunity to be, and the scale of that opportunity if we can get it right and get the research done. And we certainly have the tailwinds there. It's just a question of getting the science.
Yeah, no question. Thanks, Whitney. The tailwinds are in our favor, guys, in this space. We have an aging population that is going to explode in the coming years as increased needs. We know from the science, increased need. If you just look at our acute space, their needs go up even more. They're the ones that are even more nutritionally compromised. We have just philosophically and attitudinally, psychologically, an awareness that we are using way too many drugs and we're over medicated as a society. And so there's a shift occurring in terms of having a preference for more natural solutions versus synthetic solutions. And then the medical community is starting to wake up to this because companies like yours and ours are doing the hard science to demonstrate that this works and that this should be a core part of their multimodal approach to treating patients. So the tailwinds run heavily in our favor in this space.
Perfect. Well, I just want to thank you, Eziah, and the rest of the MEND team. I think you guys are doing really great work, and we really appreciate you sharing your perspectives with us today. I'd also like to thank the participants for their great questions and for joining us to discuss this really important topic. So thank you all. And I just want to also add that we host these calls every week at 3 p.m. Central. You can register for the AgriFood Conversations webinar series by going to agrifoodconversations.com. And a replay of this webinar will be emailed to you in the next 24 hours. If you know anyone that you'd like to have share with that, you'll be able to easily forward that on. So thank you all for joining. And Eziah, thank you so much for,
thank you, everyone.
being
Stay
a part
healthy
of this
and
conversation.
safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.